Africa has just crossed a historic threshold, and the world is watching. Ethiopia has completed the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, a colossal structure that has shaken up Africa's energy game, stirred geopolitical waters, and electrified a movement for continental self-determination. This dam doesn't just hold back water, it holds the power to rewrite Africa's future. Standing tall on the Blue Nile with a staggering $4 billion price tag, GIRD is now the largest hydropower plant on the African continent. But its story is anything but simple. Behind its towering walls lies a tale of ambition, defiance, and transformation. Why did this dam cause such global controversy? How did Ethiopia, a developing nation, pull off a project this massive on its own terms? And what ripple effects is it creating across Africa? The announcement out of Addis Ababa felt like a thunderclap. After 14 years of grinding effort, GIRD is not just complete, it's operational. 11 turbines, 6 already online, now pulse with electricity, bringing power to millions who have lived in darkness for generations. This is not just a dam. It's a revolution cast in steel and concrete. What sets GIRD apart is how Ethiopia built it, without bowing to international lenders. This was not another aid-funded project controlled by foreign interests. This was Ethiopia's people stepping up. Citizens dug deep into their pockets. Teachers, farmers, and entrepreneurs all contributed. The Ethiopian diaspora sent money home. Bonds were bought not for profit, but as a patriotic duty. GIRD became a national mission. Now that it's done, the country is no longer begging for energy, it's exporting it. When fully online, GIRD will generate 6,450 megawatts of electricity, more than doubling Ethiopia's supply. Power blackouts will become history. Expensive, polluting fuel generators will be replaced. Industries once shackled by unreliable energy can finally grow. Already, countries like Sudan, Djibouti, and Kenya are lining up to buy clean power from Ethiopia. GIRD puts the country at the heart of East Africa's energy grid. But this is bigger than electricity, it's geopolitical. Egypt has long feared the dam, relying on the Nile for over 90% of its freshwater. GIRD shifts control upstream, creating a new balance of power along the river. Sudan, while interested in cheap power, has concerns about water management, flood cycles, and agricultural flows. Tensions have simmered for years, escalating at times into military threats. Still, Ethiopia insists GIRD is not a weapon but a tool for stability and development. They argue it regulates the river's flow, reduces floods, and benefits all. For Africans across the continent, Ethiopia's refusal to cave to foreign pressure has struck a powerful chord. GIRD has become a symbol of what African nations can accomplish when they believe in themselves. It's the clearest proof yet that Africa doesn't have to be dependent on others to dream and build big. Some hail GIRD as a blueprint for future projects. Others warn of diplomatic fallout and transboundary disputes. But the reality is this: GIRD is real, it's running, and it's forcing the world to take African ambition seriously. The journey wasn't easy. Ethiopia faced enormous hurdles: financial, technical, and political. From the start, experts said it was impossible. How could a low-income country fund such a mega-project without loans from the IMF or World Bank? But Ethiopia did it, by rallying its people instead of depending on outsiders. Money wasn't the only obstacle. GIRD's location, in the remote Benishangul Gumuz region, made logistics a nightmare. Roads had to be built, engineers trained, heavy equipment imported. Ethiopia had no prior experience building dams of this scale, but it learned as it went. A new generation of skilled professionals was born from this challenge. Then came the politics. Egypt, feeling threatened, pushed back with harsh rhetoric and demands for binding agreements on water flow. At one point, tensions flared so high, war didn't seem out of the question. But Ethiopia stood firm, defending its right to develop and to use its natural resources. The construction faced delays. Turbines arrived late. Testing phases stalled. At times, funding dried up. Internal unrest complicated the timeline. Workers toiled in extreme conditions, separated from families, and thousands of people were relocated to make way for the dam's reservoir. Their sacrifices rarely make the news, but without them, GERD would not exist. By 2025, when the final turbine came online, it wasn't just an engineering milestone, it was a national triumph. Ethiopia had overcome every setback. Against all odds, it had built the most ambitious infrastructure project in its history. So what does GERD really mean for Ethiopia? And for Africa? First, it solves one of Africa's biggest challenges: energy. Power shortages have crippled economies across the continent. Hospitals, schools, factories, too often they go dark. With GERD, Ethiopia flips that script. Now it has enough electricity not just for itself, but for export. This surplus creates jobs, lowers costs, and makes industrial growth possible. East Africa's entire power grid gets a boost. As part of the Eastern Africa power pool, GERD connects Ethiopia to neighbors like Kenya and Sudan, cutting fossil fuel use and stabilizing power supply. It also strengthens Africa's climate strategy. Hydropower emits far less CO2 than oil or coal. But GERD's impact isn't just economic. It's psychological. For too long, Africa's big projects came with foreign strings attached. GERD proves Africans can finance, design, and deliver their own destiny. It echoes the goals of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which needs cheap, reliable energy to drive manufacturing and regional trade. Ethiopia is now more than a country, it's a power broker. As it supplies neighbors with energy, it gains influence. Where Egypt once held the Nile's power, Ethiopia now becomes a counterweight. This is a regional shift. Power lines aren't just infrastructure, they're tools of diplomacy. Environmentally, GERD offers both promise and challenges. On the plus side, it reduces emissions, cuts flood risk, and stabilizes water flows. But environmentalists worry about downstream impacts. Changes in sediment patterns could affect soil fertility in Egypt and Sudan. Farmers may need to rely more on fertilizers. Aquatic ecosystems might change. The massive reservoir also displaced communities and created a new ecological reality. Ethiopia counters these claims with promises of regulation and careful management. But success depends on transparency and cooperation, especially with downstream countries. The African Union has tried to mediate, but mistrust lingers. Will GERD lead to unity or division? The answer depends on diplomacy and shared vision. Still, GERD is already changing Africa's narrative. It's part of a larger awakening, an era of self-reliance sweeping across the continent. And it's not just Ethiopia. In West Africa, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré is championing a similar model. While not building dams, Traoré is focusing on food independence, industrial growth, and resource control. His administration is pushing to replace food imports with local production. It's investing in rice farming, food storage, and processing plants. Already, Burkina Faso is feeding its neighbors. Traoré has also launched bold industrial moves, like building the country's first government-backed gold refinery and diversifying energy sources. While the scale differs, the vision mirrors Ethiopia's: take control, build capacity, and reject external domination. Both GERD and Traoré's policies are about sovereignty, not just economic, but political and psychological. They send a message: Africa can no longer be dictated to. It is defining its own path. Naturally, this self-reliance challenges powerful interests. GERD disrupted Egypt's regional dominance. Traoré's decisions upset former colonial powers. But these disruptions are signs of growth, not chaos. Real independence requires struggle. The GERD is no longer just Ethiopia's project. And Traoré's reforms are no longer isolated ideas. Together, they represent a movement, Africa, reclaiming its power. Whether through hydropower in the east or agriculture in the west, the message is clear: the era of dependency is ending. This new wave of African-led development is igniting hope across the continent, but it also demands vigilance. Successes like GERD and Burkina Faso's industrial push have raised expectations. Citizens are now asking more from their leaders, demanding transparency, accountability, and long-term vision, not just grand announcements. With each new dam, refinery, or farming initiative, Africa chips away at the legacy of exploitation and begins to craft a new identity, one rooted in ownership, innovation, and resilience. But sustaining this momentum will require collaboration. Ethiopia must work with its neighbors to manage the Nile responsibly. Burkina Faso must ensure its gold and food policies benefit the people, not just the state. And other African nations must draw lessons, building partnerships within the continent rather than looking constantly to the west or east for solutions. The road ahead is steep, but it is finally African-built. GIRD and Traore's reforms are no longer just case studies, they are templates. The message is spreading. The continent doesn't need handouts. It needs belief, strategy, and unity. Africa has the talent. It has the resources. Now, with projects like GIRD lighting the way, it finally has the momentum. The only question left: can the rest of Africa keep up?